Hello, hello, and welcome to our Conversations That Matter. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, I'm Valerie Probstfeld, certified speaker and communications coach, life coach, international speaker, author, podcaster, and many more things. My favorite thing to do in life, in everything I do, is help people communicate with purpose and integrity with not just the people around them, but with themselves. So before our guest introduces herself, I have a request for anyone listening or watching. As this series continues, I would love your input for communication topics that interest you, because communication runs deep, a lot deeper than we think. So I want you to not be afraid to stretch the limits of your imagination for where and how communication shapes your life. And then please feel free to DM your ideas to me, drop them in the comments, or even email them to me at yorona@yoronabosser.com. All right, we're going to jump right in with our wonderful guest, Valerie. Valerie, would you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself before we head into our conversation?
Hi, Rona. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. And thank you for everyone who's listening to this live or to the replay. I really just am so thrilled to be here. And you have just such amazing accolades. And I just love, Rona, this topic of communication and how important it is, how much it really impacts both our own inner dialogue as well as the people around us and the ripple effects it can have. So a little bit about me. I'm a nurse practitioner and I have a couple decades of experience as a nurse practitioner in pediatrics as well as pediatric neurology. And I am an author. I just published a book, To Mom Is to Love, back in May of 2025, as well as a speaker and a flutist. So that's a little bit about me. I got my master's in nursing from Yale University in 2009, as well as Bradley University for my bachelor's in both music and nursing. And I currently live in the Chicagoland area, but also have been out on the East Coast as well as in Texas. So I've kind of been all over the place and just love to travel, love to connect with people, and love to learn the amazing things that we are doing and how we can help each other rise and lift each other up in this world.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Valerie speaks to my heart, I have to tell you guys, because both of us spend our days helping people communicate in high stakes spaces. With parents navigating their children's health and mental and emotional well-being, and with me and parents and leaders learning to communicate with that clarity and that courage and that presence. So my curiosity, as you and I have talked before, and I've been on your podcast as well, what interests me so much is I am so curious about what you have discovered about the kinds of communication that actually help people feel grounded and seen when they're overwhelmed or unsure. And how might those principles guide parents and leaders?
I think that's such an important question. And I mean, I think a lot of it is really, you said ground and feeling grounded. I think that is so huge. And we as a species really, I feel like have a basic body language, this nonverbal communication that's so important right off the bat. Like as a musician, I worked so much on how to play my flute with certain volumes, with certain dynamics. Am I smiling? Am I walking on the stage all like just upset,
Right.
looking intense, or am I playing with my hair? Am I doing these things? All that to say, it was interesting. So much of what I learned of these simple things that we don't realize we're doing, that we are communicating with. I remember one time, there was a guy that was a bit upset at me, and I mean, I don't need to go into the details. It was not a big deal, but he was upset just in society, like with just everything that I feel like right now there is just so much negativity that, like, how can we
Yeah.
spread more positivity out there? How can we spread more smiles out there? And I remember, though, I was triggered when he got upset at me, and I was like, "Sir, have you tried mindfulness?"
Like, I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to give you back the energy you're giving me,
I know.
but I'm also going to give you words that match not at all the energy.
Yeah,
It's so
ex-
incredible, right?
exactly. And it was not
Yeah.
matching. I was like, it is a beautiful day out. It is, you need to appreciate the sun outside right now. And it's like, okay, my words
Oh,
exactly are not matching what my body language, what my tone is saying. And I think that is so
oh,
underestimated sometimes of how can we ground ourselves? How can we feel safe in this moment, or
right.
respond as opposed to react. And I think that goes back to, Viktor Frankl talks
Mm,
about the space between reaction and response. And
yes.
I think that's so important. Like, in that space, he says, and I can't say it as eloquently, I'm trying to remember exactly how he says it, but between stimulus and response, there is a space. And within that space lies our growth and our freedom and our ability to
Yes.
choose. And I think that,
Yes.
isn't that like so
It's funny. So I call, I coined a term. I call it the emotional stopgap mechanism.
yeah,
And what I realized is that people don't know how to access that space. They don't
yep,
know how to access it. You can know that that space is there, and especially when you're in overwhelm, oh gosh, then it's like that space is even less accessible. So it's not so much the knowledge, it's the how to that we miss a lot of. And
absolutely.
learning the how to and practicing with it when the stakes are low. I say this all the time when it comes to parents and leaders and speakers. You have to be willing to practice with it when the stakes are low, because if you were a pianist or a violinist or a flutist or any all right, all
Mhm.
of these things, you're not going to perform for the very first time if you've not practiced. You're not going to perform in front of 1,000 people if you've never practiced before. Why would you do that? It wouldn't happen. We practice at so many of life skills, but because our mental world is so internalized, our emotional world is so internalized, we don't think it's something that requires practice. We believe it's something we're inherently born with. And one of the things that's coming in my book is that fact that we are not born with social emotional development skills. We're not born with social emotional intelligence. And we're not born with predetermined components to that social emotional development. We are born with, yes, certain personality traits, behavioral traits, and certain things that I call it uh, pre-coded or potential for. But just like a car that is built to go to 220 miles per hour, but you've never taken it out to 220 miles per hour. You never put in a situation like that. The same thing is true of our pre-coding. It's potential for these things. So then when we get into the environment, what we're there to do, and especially with parents and leaders and people who have high stakes position where they are role models in the world. And most of us are role models to a degree in any space that we take up in the world. But one of the things that I've noticed is that we fall back on what we know, what we learned without thought, without consciousness. So when we give people that opportunity to access that space, the space between, and we give them the modalities to practice with that space, that's when you can engage it when the stakes are high. But if you haven't actually practiced the tools to actually access that space, it's kind of like, I know there's a room in my house, but I've never been in it, you
Yep,
know?
yep,
And so one of the things that I'd coined is this idea of the emotional stopgap mechanism. I love visual aids because it can really help people understand better. And I liken it to like the valve on a hose, on a water hose.
mhm,
It doesn't completely stop everything entirely, but it slows the water down to a trickle. So I want people to imagine there's a valve in your brain. And when you're feeling that emotional response, the first thing you need to do is acknowledge it. You need to say, oh, yeah, I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling afraid. I'm going to mess up here. I'm feeling, angry and frustrated because I just don't have time for this. And this is annoying.
mhm.
And you have to acknowledge those things. And you imagine twisting the valve and allowing all that emotional piece to kind of slow its trickle down. Because when you do that, then you can actually re-engage your reason thinking, your thought process that says, but what do I need to do in this moment? Which is your response. What will be most helpful in this moment?
Mhm. Mhm.
That is really hard for so many people. I know you and I, because we talk a lot about parenting.
Mhm.
Parenting is chaotic.
Mhm.
It's unpredictable. You are not dealing with a robot. You are dealing with a human being who's has all these internal world complexities that you've got no clue about. You don't have a knowledge of it. You are in learning process of that. So when your child responds in a way that you were like, oh God, that was surprising. You're like, okay, what do I do here? And I'm going to give you a really great example. Just this morning happened. So there's the PTA is putting on this glow party tonight. My son, for those of you who know, is 8 years old. And when we got the flyer from, from school and everything, this was a couple weeks ago, my husband and I were talking about it. And we're like, oh, do we really want to go? Whatever. We don't want to go. And we didn't talk to Connor about it.
Mhm.
And that was our mistake. We didn't actually ask him, is this something you want to go to or not? We just kind of assumed, oh, because sometimes usually we go to things when he's made mention of it. But in
Mhm.
this instance, he made no mention of it. So we were like, oh, well, no, we won't go. We won't RSVP. Well, this morning, we have a calendar in our kitchen that has the school stuff and the PTA stuff. And he points out, he's like, guess what today is? Today's the glow party. And I'm like, oh. And I said, Connor, we didn't RSVP that we would be going to it. Meltdown city, in the kitchen, on the floor. His life is ruined. And here's the thing, as adults, we're like, yeah, it's not the end of the world, kid. That's the part of your brain that's like, come on, it's no big deal. But the other part of your brain needs to acknowledge, but it is a big deal to him. And
Mhm.
this is where empathy is so key. When something is a big deal to somebody else and their reaction is this overwhelming reaction, their reaction is this big response that you can't possibly have anticipated, right?
Mhm.
You're in a patient's room and somebody walks in and it's their loved one is in the bed and you're thinking they're going to turn to you and just talk to you and suddenly they start yelling at you and you're like, where is this coming from?
Mhm.
We have to acknowledge and recognize that they're not in our headspace and we're not in theirs.
Mhm.
So we have to give ourselves guidance towards empathy to realize, oh, this is a big deal. So the end result was okay. It was a long story, but we worked on it. And the thing that I needed to do in that moment was not go into immediate, like, let me fix this. Let me da 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 da, because a lot of parents want to fix when their child is in pain. We'll fix this, don't worry, and soothe them. Now, with Connor, when he's that upset, he needs us to actually walk away and give him space.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's something that we've recognized with him. And I did my bad thing because I'm still practicing with this. And I want everybody to understand this is a practice. I went in and tried to soothe him at first. And then I realized, oh, wait, no, I'm doing the wrong thing because he got more angry. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna be over here. But that's really important because I didn't slow my valve. I didn't turn it right away. I was like, oh, I'm hurting because he's hurting. I'm sad because he's sad. And I didn't slow it fast enough. And then I realized, oh, wait, right. What do I need to do? And I took that mental step back and was like, okay, right.
Mhm. Absolutely.
But this happens for adults, this happens for children, this happens for every single person at every single level of life, but most especially when we are overwhelmed. And because life is unpredictable, we never know when overwhelm is necessarily going to hit.
Mhm.
And I love what you said before, because you said, like, right now it feels like everybody's in that space.
Yeah.
So I think this conversation is so important for people to recognize we can do this. So how? How are some of the ways that you've helped parents and leaders really communicate a little bit more clearly and effectively, even when they're overwhelmed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love your example of the water hose. I use the example in my book as well as when I talk of mental backroads and highways. And I talk about the fact that we have this little amygdala in our brain, the fear center, the fight, flight, or freeze. And
Yeah.
that's reaction. That's Viktor Frankl's stimulus. We are reacting to a threat that our amygdala, the shape of an almond inside our skulls, deep within our skulls, is
Yeah.
so powerful. And that's for survival purposes. If I'm
Yeah.
being chased by a bear, if I'm being chased or anything that like is an immediate threat, I am so glad I have my amygdala. I'm so glad that I don't have to think about, why is this bear chasing me? Why are, that I am going to, do what I need to do to survive. And it's interesting because the amygdala, most a- animals, reptiles, all of them share an amygdala. And that is something that it is for survival purposes. But
Yeah.
what sets humans apart is the prefrontal cortex, that this part of our brain that's kind of right behind our foreheads here. And that is response. That
Yeah.
is where we can think. And so much of the time, our amygdala that's doing its job, there's a couple amazing books out there that talk about this, is like it's doing its job, thanking the amygdala, saying, thank you for reacting to this
Oh, I
threat
love
that
that.
I have. Maybe like I am running late right now and I feel that fight or flight. Like I feel my heart rate increasing. I feel like I can only focus on this. My attention, like my respirations, my breathing, it's all ready to fight,
Right.
flight, or freeze, because my amygdala thinks there's an immediate threat, because that's all it knows.
Yeah.
It's all it knows is, oh, this is, a life or death situation right now. I'm going to
Yeah.
respond. But and that's kind of what this mental highway is that I talk about. And sometimes we can, what if we experienced an issue back when we were running, like something happened, and it's a
Mhm.
highway that was created. But what I need to do in this moment, when I recognize, first understand that, oh, my amygdala is responding, or I should say reacting to something that's not an actual threat in this moment, I can take a mental
Right.
back road, and I can take a different way. I can choose gratitude in this moment. I can choose mindfulness, kindness, or maybe
Mm.
just smile, like body language.
Yeah.
You know, those things I feel like we talk about are such fluff, but in my opinion, that is what is so important, and that is what we need more,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And
It's not fluff. It's
no,
not fluff. It's actually gives us the tools that we need to function optimally in the world.
absolutely.
And I love what you said. No, I just blanked on what it was. You said something before and I was like, "Yes." That it's we can give ourselves gratitude. We can give ourselves something else because what Valerie is so aptly pointing out here is that we have choice.
Yes. Mhm.
We have choice. Yet we, for some reason, have decided that we have no control over how we react.
Mhm.
Oh, it's just how I react. Oh, you pissed me off. Like I'm driving in the middle of, I'm driving and someone cuts me off, right? I'm reacting. I'm going into that space of like of hyperarousal state. And but what's interesting is we know this, and especially with developing children, especially they don't even they haven't their prefrontal cortex is still coming online. It takes 20 plus years, your mid 20s before it's fully online. That's
Yeah.
how long it takes. So in the earliest years, it's still working on that. They have to learn and observe and communicate with others to learn how to get that prefrontal cortex online. If they don't, they're just going to keep doing what is survival instinct. And that is our amygdala. Our amygdala is actually wired, it's our reptilian brain. It's wired for our survival instinct,
Mhm.
not critical thinking, impulse control, um, anger management. It's not wired for that
Mhm.
because it's our earliest brain. And yet we've developed over time. And what's very interesting is that we have changed, especially in the developed world. We have moved from physical survival to psychological survival. And psychological survival is very messy
Yep.
because it does require us to have had mass levels of communication input, right? In early childhood development, we call that receptive communication, what we're taking in of what's being communicated to us, to take all that information and to put it in its place. So if you've got a parent or even somebody who's a leader who's constantly yelling and screaming,
Mhm.
what you're taking in is that the best way to communicate, or the way that I am learning that is communication, the path of communication is yelling and screaming.
Mhm.
I am learning that. And when we, as leaders, as parents, as people who are role models, can actually utilize a healthier choice, it's a choice,
Mhm.
then we can actually see, we are the example we want to become. We are the example our children are going to become. And so we're exemplifying that which we want to see for them.
Mhm.
So when you're asking yourselves, let's say you're a CEO and you're asking yourself why your people are always stressed and they're always like rushing around. Ask yourself what you've been exemplifying. When you're a public speaker and you're super focused on, and you're really nervous and you're super focused on, and your audience is kind of responding by leaning back and kind of disengaging from you, ask yourself what it is you're exemplifying for them.
Mhm.
Because we have this beautiful thing called the emotional contagion, and it is the most awesome thing. We actually have mirror neurons in our brain
Mhm.
that mirror what other emotional people, what is happening here. So if you're emoting, you know what, I'm gonna choose to be calm here. Yeah, I'm gonna walk into this with calm. You know what, yeah, I'm frustrated because these drivers aren't moving, but I'm not gonna let it get to me because it is what it is, and we'll get through this traffic as we get through this traffic. We're giving them the emotional charge they need to decide how they're going to respond in that situation. And this is really important. I'm not saying that we should always look for the silver lining and show that immediately. I think it's very important to acknowledge what you have going on there. Oh man, we're stuck in traffic. This is not fun. This is going to be difficult. And you have your child in the car, or you're doing something like you're a leader and you're walking into a boardroom and you're like, guys, this is rough, right? This thing that just happened, this is not going to be easy to deal with. This is a big challenge for us. You're acknowledging the reality on the ground, and then you move forward with, we've got this though. We've got this. Let's brainstorm right now on how we can address this. Let's figure out how we can move forward with this thing. Let's figure out this challenge. Like when Connor and I are stuck in traffic, I used to, and he picked this up a long time ago, I used to be a very, very aggravated driver, like a very, ragey, like, oh, and all these nonverbal responses of like, oh my God. But then I started talking it out with him and saying like, oh, okay, I'm super frustrated that we're stuck in traffic. I was like, all right, but you know what? Can't do anything about it, And then I would start singing a song, and I'm like, this is gonna be a sunshiny day, and like I would just start doing other things and saying like, well, it is what it is. We'll get there when we get there,
Mhm.
and it changed the way he's responding to it as well. He still gets a little same like where I used to be. He still gets a little aggravated, and then he kind of goes a little more quiet because he's taking in that part. And I
Yes.
think that's super vital. And FYI, before I have you tell your input here, I do have a couple of things coming up in the chat. Wonderful. I see somebody put, words are powerful. When they either help or hurt, they reveal who we are. And that is very true. And something I do want to acknowledge about that is that sometimes the reason why you come out with words that hurt first is because it's what you learned. It's the pattern you learned. It may not necessarily be what you want to do, but there's a huge difference between what we want to do and what we've learned, we've been conditioning ourselves to react as.
Mhm.
So this is really vital to understand. If you built a rut because other people showed you this was the groove to build, right? This is how hurtful, I'm going to use hurtful words because other people use hurtful words, and this is what I've been conditioned to learn. Even if there's a part of you that's saying, I don't want to react this way, but you're still doing it, there's a huge opportunity there. If you know you don't want to do it that way, it requires you learning other ways. You cannot just tell yourself, I don't want to do this. You have to actually learn what you do want to do. It's very easy to pay attention to what we don't want to do. I don't want to hurt somebody, but it's nearly impossible when you're in a heightened state of emotional vulnerability and overwhelm. It's nearly impossible to not react the way that you learned.
Mhm.
you have to do an unlearning and a relearning of new ways to do it.
Mhm.
So I want your input on that before we go on to that next chat piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I talk about with mental back roads and taking those mental back roads. And it's all about neuroplasticity. And I think that, the brain is not a muscle, but it absolutely can react like a muscle. So if you think about, like,
Yes.
you can't run a half, or you can't, I just ran a half marathon, so that's why I said half
Woo.
marathon. I can't run a marathon overnight, or whatever it is. But I feel like when I think about it from exercise, when I think about it from a muscular standpoint, it really
Yeah.
puts an interesting visual onto it, because there are some days that are easier than others, that are some hours that are easier than others. But if I keep pushing forward, I am strengthening my mental back road in a way that I am strengthening that react the response as opposed to the reaction. So if I'm maybe having an angry face, for example, like with my kids I've worked on, like, and I think sometimes it's all about perspective. We don't necessarily even know a lot of the times we're having these reactions, this body language, like I was saying earlier with this, like, sir, have you tried mindfulness? In my mind, I'm like, he needs to try mindfulness, but I'm not realizing how I look to the observer. For me, it
Mm.
actually was an interesting thing that, when my verbose 2-year old at the time told me, Mom, I hate your angry face. Why do you yell all the time? It really caught me off
Mm.
guard, because I thought I was never going to yell because my mom yelled all the time. And so I was like, surely, I'm not as bad. I'm not as bad as my mom was. I know what
Mm.
I'm doing. But I had a camera earlier that day. We had like this nanny cam running that I forgot to turn off. And I was like, you know what? As a flute player, I'm going to assess my performance right now. Like, I don't think I would have even thought about that if I wasn't a musician. But I was like, let me see how I sounded, because I
Yeah.
doubt I sounded that, I wasn't yelling, because I remember scolding her earlier for not listening for the 10th time. But when I
Mm.
listened back to the camera, it was such an interesting perspective, because I sounded exactly like my mom. All I saw was what she described, an angry face yelling. And it didn't matter.
Mm.
It didn't matter that she wasn't listening or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly what it was I scolded her for, but in my brain, I'm like, this is why I'm doing this.
Mm.
And this is why. But to the observer, it's a different perspective. And, I think of that sometimes with art, with, like, you can put things in the foreground or in the background. And it depends
Mm.
on who the observer is. And that's not to say that, the fact that, yeah, there was this reaction that was happening. She wasn't yelling, or she wasn't listening. So I was yelling. There was that. And embracing that imperfection of the, I am
Mhm.
working on this. We are working on something together, but also
Right.
acknowledging the fact that, to an observer, things are different. And how can we work on our mental back roads
Yeah.
that, you know, are how can I be grateful in this moment right now? How can I look outside of the window? Or even like with the angry face, it simply took, let me try to smile more. And
Yeah.
like we talked about with the mirror neurons, you can then have others smile more. And it's just this simple
Yeah.
thing that studies have absolutely shown the
I
neuroscience
love it.
benefit of just simply smiling. You're tricking your brain. So I think
Totally.
yeah, there's such simple things that, and a lot of the
Mhm.
time, I really want to emphasize that it starts with your own self-talk, though. Like, that is
Yes.
so vital, I feel like, and something that
So vital.
yeah,
I
yeah,
I I I think you said something really important here. How do you become the observer of your own behavior?
yes,
I talk about this all the time, especially for public speakers and leaders.
hmm,
I teach them how to observe themselves.
yep,
And so it's really ironic that you watch the nanny cam back because
yeah,
that's one of the things that I will do is I will have people record themselves because if you can't pay attention to what it is that you're exhibiting, what it is that you're embodying and expressing,
yeah,
because when we express through verbal and nonverbal cues all the time. Just a little grunt
yeah,
can tell somebody so much, especially if they know you well. Just like a
oh
and
yeah,
a roll of the eyes and you're like, "Oh, wow, okay, yeah." And it's those cues that we're really expressing. That's why my book is called Unspoken Signals, because we have so many unspoken signals that we're very unaware of. And
yeah,
I think it's very interesting because it brings me to this next comment here, and we'll shift gears a little bit off of the parenting aspect, but Somebody asked, how can leaders use language more intentionally to build trust without sounding scripted or insincere? And I think the first thing is when you become aware, when you observe yourself and what it is you're signaling out there, both verbally and non-verbally, you start to build your trust with yourself. You cannot build trust with others if you haven't figured out how to trust your own responses,
Mhm.
how to trust your own reactions first, how to acknowledge them and say, oh, I did that.
Mhm.
And a huge part, in my opinion, of building trust is the part that we talk about, which is repair. We aren't always going to respond appropriately. We aren't always, sometimes we are going to sound a little scripted or a little insincere because maybe you had something, a personal call that just totally threw you off your rocker for the rest of that day. And you come into work and you're like, I know I have to be kind to my people, but I really, the most sincere thing you can do is honor and acknowledge what that you're going through. It doesn't mean spilling everything to your people.
Mhm.
Does not mean that.
Yeah.
It means, you know what? I just need to tell you guys that I had to deal with a really tough thing this morning. So I'm a little off today. So I just want to put that out there before we get the day going, because I know we've got a lot to do and we've got a lot on our plate. So if you are noticing something, just bring it to my attention, because I'm a little off. I'm a
Mhm.
little off kilter, and that builds trust like nothing else. Like nothing else. I do the same thing with my speakers. If you are walking into a speaking engagement and you are super nervous, I call this acknowledging the elephant in the room. It doesn't mean we have to let the elephant trample all of us. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you're giving the elephant permission to ride rampant over your people or your audience. It simply means acknowledge it so that people can say, then put a little note in the back of their brain and file that away and say, and then when you snip or you snap at somebody, the person goes back to that little file note that's sticking out and says, "Oh, I know this is probably because he had a bad day. He's had a bad morning."
Yeah.
And it's not an excuse. It's an awareness of understanding, and it builds empathy and trust like nothing else does. So when my speaker is like nervous and they go on their stage, it's not about saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and being apologetic about it. It's about acknowledging it. There's a huge difference between apologizing for it and acknowledging it. One is like this shouldn't be, but the reality is we are. We as humans simply are. So you can't say this shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be affected by this. You are a human being, therefore you're affected by that. But you're not going to let it get in the way. So you want to acknowledge it and allow other people to acknowledge it, and then you want to get down to work, and that builds trust like nothing else. So when a speaker comes out and goes like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm a little nervous," then people pity you. Then they're like, or if you come in, you're like, "Oh my God, I had such a horrible phone call before." That's
Mhm.
a different way of of saying it. That's an apologetic kind of like, excuse me, versus like, "You know what? I just need to tell you I had a really hard phone call. You know what? I'm so excited to be here. I am also nervous." So I just want to acknowledge that, and let's get into it. Yes. So
Mhm.
that way people can clock that. They can clock that.
Mhm.
And they give you a little bit more breathing space. That's what it's designed to do. It's not about being like pity me, feel bad for me, excuse me, so this is giving me my excuse to treat you poorly in the office. No, 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 no. Because again, as a leader, if you are walking in and you're in apologetic language or excusatory language, you're giving yourself permission to be nasty, and they're not, that's not okay. Whereas if you're in acknowledgement language where you acknowledge this thing and you're like, so just clock me, let me know, and you're giving them permission to clock you, you're giving them permission to heighten your awareness of your actions.
Mhm.
Very
Mhm.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that's so true, and I think that, for me, so much of I think is so underrated is embracing imperfection. Like we
Oh,
want to be perfect. I am a recovering perfectionist. I absolutely am. But at the same time, I think when I really released that control, and a lot of it was with my paradigm shift was motherhood. When my baby was in the NICU, I thought I was going to be this A+ mom. I was going to be perfect. I have all this
yeah.
pediatric experience, all this stuff, but it's not but the control, like she went to the NICU and my control, all of that preparation vanished. And then I was reacting more, I was doing these things, I was in my head more, I had more shame because it wasn't perfect. But the thing is, life is not perfect. Nature shows us that all the time, that I don't look outside and see one solid color. I see different colors out there. I see the seasons. I see the fall leaves. Those are changing colors. The green is the chlorophyll, but decreased sunlight. Coldness, darkness is what brings out those inner colors of the yellows and the oranges. It's that imperfection. It's those things that what makes beauty. And I think we really don't emphasize that, not only in motherhood or in, parenting, but in the workplace, in any aspect in life. None of us are perfect. And the more I try to
Mhm.
control that, I think the more it becomes like this builds this wall where it's like, how can we just be? I think, as a musician, a lot of like my speaking, I think, comes from the training that I've had, but also in the sense that I remember my better performances were sometimes when I just kind of didn't feel well, where I was like, I'm not like going to be perfect here. Or I remember one time I had the most amazing piece that was like this 10-page long, super technical thing that I wanted it to be so perfect that I kept
Mhm.
taping the page together right before. I remember sitting like before I walked out on stage. I don't want these pages to fall off. Oh my gosh, they're good. What if they fall off? This needs to be perfect. The piece itself was fine, but I accidentally taped the piece too much and I couldn't take it off. And my piano player,
Oh.
like the accompanist, she was amazing, and she just kept doing, like the same passage over till I got my page off, and I was mortified. I was like, oh my gosh, everyone saw that
Mm.
mistake. But I actually have the recording of
Oh,
that, which I'm glad I have.
oh,
It was fine. It was
yeah.
completely fine. In my head, I was like,
Mm.
I did this to myself. I did it too much. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
forced all this shame. But when I look back on that performance, it's like, that was fine. Like no one probably
Yeah.
missed that.
Well, yeah, and that's the spotlight effect in action too. That's
Yeah.
when you're like you think you're in this like spotlight where every single error, every single tiny line and every single thing is
Yeah.
highlighted. And the reality is for other people that's it, their observation is not nearly that critical. It's not nearly that, and they're wishing the best for you too. So they're coming at it from definitely a different place and space.
Mhm.
I think that there was an experiment once where they did this thing with college students and they gave them these crazy shirts to wear with crazy sayings on it. And they were so self-conscious about doing it. But like pretty much nobody noticed. Nobody
Yeah.
noticed. And so because we are in the spotlight of our own stage in our own mind, we're always there. And as a result, we think other people are there with us too. But it's not true. It's not because they're in their own space. They're in their own space. I always find it really funny. There was this thing, and it was basically like you realize you're like the if this were a movie,
Mhm.
you're the side character in somebody else's main story, you know
Absolutely.
and it's really and we all have our main stories and everybody else is all our side characters, but we don't think that way, right? We think we're the main character in everybody else's story, and we're not. We're just simply not. And I think if I take this back to something that is super important, because I do want to hit this question once again, it's like the building of trust.
Mhm.
One of the most beautiful tools for building trust is also presence.
Mhm.
And a lot of people forget what presence actually is. Because when we're present, truly present, we're actually communicating more from truth than we are from fear.
Mhm.
The present is noticing what's happening, actually happening right now, right here, right now. I'm sitting in my chair. I'm having an awesome conversation with you. We are live. There are people paying attention. There are people watching. But it if you're here and now and you're doing this thing, it preserves that your mind from those worst case scenario spirals.
Mhm.
When you're and so if you're really paying attention to what's happening here instead of future tripping,
Yeah.
you're allowing the space for, if uncertainty shows up, we're just going to deal with it. And I have to point to this because I'm sure people heard this in the background. There was some noise going on for you, and you and I were talking about this awesome, this
Yeah.
like, because your kids are doing home,
Yes.
and I
Yeah.
was thinking to myself, like, we should acknowledge that, right?
Yes.
Because it's like, it's these are the things that are the reality of life.
Oh,
We
yeah.
cannot set a perfect stage.
Mhm.
And if we're so convinced that the perfect stage is so perfect that we must have it, then what we're doing is we're missing opportunity for growth.
Mhm.
We're missing opportunity for, like you said before, those imperfections, to actually find the beauty in the imperfections.
Mhm.
Because if you're in the middle of a boardroom meeting and somebody rushes in because they're late and something happened and you're like, and you're so angry about it, how dare they disrespect you, and how dare, what you're actually doing is you're setting up your people for failure,
Mhm. Mhm.
because you're setting them up for a state of expectation that they will never meet.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
when we build trust with our people, it's to recognize that they are whole humans,
Mhm. Mhm.
to not just recognize and acknowledge it, but to accept that they are whole humans. I had a boss many a year ago who would get so angry about people calling out, people, people not showing up, people do, all this sort of stuff. I was running a different program, and she would constantly get angry about it. Like, oh my God, somebody's always sick. Somebody's always got somebody dying. Somebody's always got, and yes,
Mhm.
that is the case. And if you are overseeing people, there will always be human elements
Mhm.
of what's going on. You will not be able to make this environment that nothing else external from that environment impacts that bubble. It's unrealistic. So we build trust with our people by acknowledging their human sides,
Mhm.
acknowledging it and helping them do better, helping them course correct, help giving them the tools they need to course correct, so
Mhm.
that for themselves. And that builds a different kind of measure of trust. And when you're present with it, right? What is actually happening now? I'm sitting in this boardroom, we're having this meeting, somebody came in. Was it really the end of the world?
Mhm.
Did it completely annihilate the entire meeting? No. Oh, it actually didn't, right? This is a quick disruption. Moving on.
Yeah.
When we're present and we can accept that the what is truly happening now, it changes the way we engage with that circumstance. And
Mhm.
it takes the pressure off of people to perform like robots.
Mhm.
And it
Absolutely.
accepts their humanity.
Mhm. Mhm.
Before we wrap this up, do you have any final components that you want to answer about communication in the overwhelm, in the space of overwhelm?
Yeah, I just want, like, just to follow up with everything that you're talking about, like, such great points. And I think that, I think it's really interesting, this whole trust of, confidence comes from the word trust, which I think is so amazing to, if you think about that. Having confidence in yourself, having confidence in whatever it is, starts with trust. And I love how you talked about, being in the moment, being present. Like, our brains, they're a fascinating time machine. We travel all the time to the past and ruminating to the future of what ifs, but it's a lonely time machine. And the only place I can truly meet others, my family, my coworkers, is in the present moment. And that's where we can be and just have that shared connection. Because I think so much of the time we're traveling by ourselves somewhere else. And when I can just be in this conversation with you and with our listeners, like, we're in the present. And I think there's such beauty in the present, but it's so often overlooked. It's so often, Charles Dickens and his Christmas Carol. He talks, I reference him, because he talks about, the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. And the
Mm.
ghost of Christmas present says, come in and know me better. You've never seen the likes of me before. And I think that's so profound,
Oh, yeah.
because we do need to know the present better. And so it's kind of like as you were talking about the present, I thought about that, and I love history and time travel, and but
Yeah.
there's so much here in the present, and opening up
Oh,
our eyes to that and being with each other in the present moment.
that is so beautiful that I want to leave it at that because I think people need to have the imagery of the idea of what you just put out there, the time travel. We are time traveling all the time. I
Yes,
want people to take that and run with it and think about how you've been time traveling in your own mind these
absolutely,
days and how you can actually meet yourself in the present more than
absolutely.
ever before. That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, Valerie.
Thank
Thank you to everybody listening and watching and enjoying. And remember that if you didn't get an opportunity to watch all or you want to rewatch it again, it will be on my LinkedIn profile page under my events. You can always grab the recording there. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely weekend ahead. For some of us in the snowstorm, stay safe. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Rona. Thank you so much to everyone who's listening. It was an absolute pleasure, and have an amazing day.